the problem is.
And I think we are. We on? Not quite.
Testing? Nope.
We're getting close. No, so we have picture but no sound. There we are. Okay. Meeting is back to order. We've had several comments, but I believe the next point on the agenda.
Can I raise one or
One.
one? Okay. I'm somewhat concerned to moderately concerned that, first of all, if you look at what got all this thing kind of going in the first place, St. Matthew's House. St. Matthew's House is, I could argue, or I'm sure Bob could if he was representing them, that they're not the plain Jane homeless shelter. They're more of a halfway house because they have a lot of people who stay there a lot more than 30 days. They have all kind of rehab programs on site. Some of them are run by what I call sister corporations of the same group that owns St. Matthew's House. And I'm still concerned about, are we going to end up with something that says for this, what we have right now, there's one, whether it's one simple one or one super deluxe one, or are we going to be in a position where, no, we can, I'm just asking the question of legal counsels as to what their opinion is.
Well, my recommendation is that you do not try to have a one-size-fits-all ordinance that eliminates, let's say, the emergency type of house, for example. This, to me, is designed to regulate the Cadillac, we used to say Cadillac, I don't know what you say anymore, but the Cadillac type of operation, I think. And it's okay, I mean, for understanding that type of an operation. But my recommendation would be that we have this changed to require that whoever it is that's in this business that wants to have a homeless shelter, that they demonstrate, tell us what kind of shelter they have in mind, whether it's the emergency or the sophisticated type of shelter, and then the application would show that how they're going to operate and what they're going to do. You still can have some requirements, minimum requirements, but if you take away a lot of these minimum requirements that are in this draft and put them into the application shall show how you're going to deal with this, rather than just say you can't have it, I think that you're going to survive the facial validity issue a lot better. So that would be my recommendation.
But my key question is, let's assume that an operator comes in and they want to build a, let's say, 30-bed super deluxe one. So it gets approved at some point on some site. Now then another operator comes in a year or so and says, oh, we want to build a 30-bed, just shelter for the night, minimal stuff. So now we're into a situation, are we going to have another one of those? So now we have two shelters, 30 beds, one super deluxe one. That's my question.
You very well may.
Well, at least you answered it. Thank you.
Okay.
Depending upon the need. If you need it, then it could be approved. If you don't need it, then maybe it would not be approved.
It's based on need,
Mm-hmm.
much like
Right.
hospitals and so forth.
Yeah. Have to, a certificate of need. Okay.
Exactly.
I know the folks have been anxiously waiting, so we're not going to open this to public comment. I would request that, in the interest of not having to bring in lunch, if the person who speaks before you covers the same points, if you would just kind of go over those and bring up anything additional. And here we go. You have the floor.
Hey, good afternoon. Or is it noon yet? Almost.
Still morning.
Okay, good day, as they would say in Australia.
Say who we are, Rick.
Oh, yeah, I'm Rick Steinmeier, a 35-year resident of Bonita Springs. I really do appreciate the volunteers. I do a lot of I'm a full-time volunteer myself. The volunteer to try and help the people of the city of Bonita Springs out. And it's been shown many times in the past few years that the people of Bonita Springs don't really want a homeless shelter of any sort. We don't really need a homeless shelter of any sort. We became a city. We've written ordinances that facilitate the sheriff to be able to spot these people that are squatting on private property and move them. We've done very well. We've gotten rid of a lot of the crime, the prostitution, drug dealers in the city of Bonita Springs. I'm very proud of the sheriff's department under the guise of the LPA and city council. Now, this is a very comprehensive draft of, and it covers everything. It's exactly what I thought I would see. When I was told by community development, I said, why don't we just eliminate homeless shelters in the city of Bonita Springs, because that's what the people of Bonita Springs want. It's been demonstrated over and over again. But the St. Matthew's House, which is not in the city of Naples, the city of Naples does not have a homeless shelter because they've zoned it out, that they don't have any homeless shelter in the city of Naples, and everybody thinks, oh, this is Naples, but it isn't. I was told by John Donler, I said, why don't we just eliminate homeless shelters in the city of Bonita Springs? Seems pretty simple. We don't want them. We write an ordinance. We don't want them. We don't have them. No, that's not good. We got to write a law, an ordinance, and make it so restrictive that nobody would ever build a homeless shelter in the city of Bonita Springs. So what do we got? We have this piece of paper here, which is very comprehensive, very thoughtful, to cover every aspect of homeless shelters and drug abuse and all this other stuff. And then we have very competent, extinguished lawyers that tell us we can't do what we want. Now, I and you and them, we are the government in this country. Believe it or not, we the people are the government. And we get what we deserve. And if we deserve to be treated better by this city, then we are. We have people ramming this stuff down our throats when we don't want this and that. And it's, oh, well, so-and-so did this, and oh, well, you hurt somebody's feelings here and everything else. Okay, well, there are laws, written laws, that don't agree with the federal government. We the people need to change the laws and the opinions that are not good or desired by the people. I hope we can get an extension of this moratorium, because this is a long way from finished. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope you can hear me. Bear with me, I'm just getting over the flu, and I may start coughing, so. Good morning, I'm Carolyn Gallagher. I'm from Cedar Creek. I'm actually feeling a little down after reading our outside lawyer's comments on the homeless shelter ordinance that we spent so many months writing. Many of us didn't want a shelter in the midst of our housing areas, schools, etc., but we were convinced that regulating a shelter was better than saying no. Some of us worked with the city on an ordinance that would allow a small shelter, but also address our concerns of crime, littering, loitering, public urination, drops in our property values, and overall incompatibility with the surroundings. Now it seems we cannot regulate many things that we hoped we could. For example, Bonita Springs residency, bicycles, room size, computers for the residents, etc. It appears that addressing shelter size and density is what we have to do now, and we must find data to support the size shelter we want to write into the ordinance. I did research yesterday to find homeless data for Bonita. I couldn't get accurate and timely data that I believe we need to make a reasonable decision on the shelter size or the number of beds for Bonita Springs. Here are the 4 steps I think we should take to determine an accurate number and complete the ordinance. 1. We need several years of homeless counts, or at least one recent accurate year based on the HUD definition. 2. We need 2 counts a year. Our homeless population is larger in the winter and smaller in the summer, so counting in those seasons will allow insight into the number of Bonita's indigenous homeless population and the homeless snowbirds. Remember, HUD takes its survey in January, guaranteeing larger numbers for warm cities like Bonita Springs. 3. We need to hire someone to do Bonita Springs count. That means money. Lee County is not accurate or timely enough for our purpose. Lee County will do this year's HUD count on 26 January 2013, but it will not reveal it until April. They use percentages and other calculations to estimate Bonita's homeless on total Lee County data. They actually inflate their count in some cases. 4, we need additional time. We need an accurate count and shouldn't rush this ordinance to a vote. Most likely, it will require extending the moratorium in order to get accurate data for this year. In summation, it's extremely important that the ordinance protect the community and the homeless, be legally enforceable and fair. If we take the time to make it right on the front end, it will preclude problems later. Let's start with an accurate count of the homeless population because this is the core of the ordinance needed for determining shelter size. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Deborah McLean, and I'm the publisher of the Banana Peel. And I came here today because I had a good sense and information that this would be a face-off and nothing to do with facial validity. This is based on property rights, not the homeless. People are in this for money. It is my suggestion that the city decide to purchase rather than fight the 4 properties that are in question to save our community in character and in economic future value. If the city were to purchase all of the 4 properties at the tax appraised price, then we would not have this issue before us any further. And that would be the only way to stop this continuation wasting of the staff of the city, hiring outside counsel, and tormenting and terrorizing the residents of this community. Thank you.
My name is Linda Schwartz, and I've lived in Bonita Springs for several years. I'm a former clinical social worker with over 25 years experience working in residential and community settings. My area of expertise is social research and program design, development, and evaluation. I have a master's degree from University of Michigan. I want to address the outside counsel's comment on item 11A, shelter size occupancy, beginning on page 16 of 28. The number of beds proposed in the ordinance is not arbitrary. Rather, it is based on objective data, the best that we have available. And the first objective data source was the Department of Human Services point-in-time study, which Carolyn just referenced, which showed a total of 36 homeless persons and 0 homeless families in Bonita Springs. The next objective data we had was from April 2012, a report from the Lee County Homeless Commission, which said they saw a 20% decline in the homeless population from the previous year. So if you take a 20% reduction of 36, it comes to 29 beds. and that is how we arrived at the number of 30. I agree that Bonita needs to do its own survey. And the question is not only how many homeless do we have, but also how many homeless would avail themselves to the services of homeless shelters. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's very interesting. Very good.
Good morning, LPA members, city officials. My name is Patricia Zimmerman, and I'm a member of Be Safe Bonita, and I live in Cedar Creek. I would like to thank the LPA, the city attorney Audrey Vance, John Dulmer, and all their support staff for all the hard work that they've done writing the ordinance. And I also would like to thank my fellow workshop friends for their input and diligence as well. I feel, however, that the moratorium, or the memorandum, from the city attorney's office has taken the wind out of our sails. That said, I feel that there are some changes that should be necessary. And I'm going to have you look into the number 12, the 1 through 18, please, if you might follow along with me.
What page are you on, 12?
The
Operational
number
ordinance.
12. Instead of going through the long moratorium one, this is a little bit shorter. On page 2, where it talks about identification checks, we need to have some kind of identification for these people. There has to be some legal identification and their last address. We can't just say it's illegal to find out who these people really are. And number 3, intake and evaluation. We need to retain everything on the list, but add the fugitives, is what Ms. Grady has said, and to give those whose cases are still pending. I go along with that as well. On page 8, I feel that 30 beds are way too many. The need is not there. The need in Bonita is minimal, and as far as the population, as far as the percentage, we all know that residents, in fact, are snowbirds, and they have homes up north, so you can't really go by the percentage. And by not counting children under 6, this frees up beds for more adults. So I believe the maximum bed should be 20. But with compromise being the operative word lately, I am willing to compromise at 25 beds. It is my hope that you'll be willing to compromise at a maximum of 25 beds as well. And D, on that same page, I think the citizen input for the individual rooms was 3 adults, and I agree that should be kept. And E, for the shelter designated with dormitories, they have a maximum of 8 residents, and the citizen input is 6. I agree that should be kept at 6.
I don't know where she is.
On page 11 and 12, Ms. Grady says the second sentence is unconstitutional, and I feel that it is unconstitutional for the taxpayers to have to pick up the tab for the additional services for a homeless shelter. Aren't they tax exempt? Do they pay taxes? A homeless shelter, would they pay taxes? Property tax?
Depends, it's structured as a nonprofit or a for-profit.
Yeah.
Well, they're going to say it's not for profit, but we all know that's not true. And number 12, page 12, expansion of existing facilities, I think that needs to be retained. Ms. Grady said it is harsh, but not invalid. We need to keep that, please. And page 13, gotta catch up here. On the annual reporting, I think that We need to keep everything except for, it says, no felons allowed. I mean, they're not to have felons anyway, right? So we shouldn't be reporting about how many felons are in the shelter. Should be no felons or pedophiles allowed. Did everybody find that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. In light of the attorney's memorandum, please give us more time before the ordinance is presented to the city council. And we really need to do the research. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Conrad Schultz, and I'm a founding member of the group Concerned Citizens of Bonita. And we're one of the groups that got involved in this issue a long time ago when the first proposal came near Spanish Wells at the old lumber yard. I want to thank you all for all the time you've devoted to this. I know it's an enormous amount of work, and I appreciate it, and I know members of our group appreciate it as well. I think it's important because I heard the discussion this morning, and I don't think the analogy was carried too far, but I want to make sure it doesn't get carried too far. The restaurant analogy, in my opinion, only goes so far in this case. I think we have to take a look at how we came to even coming up with these ordinances. And the reason we are all here is because there's a recognition that there is something of a burden placed on the community by these kinds of facilities. We know so much more today than we did a couple of years ago about the criminal activities that occur surrounding these facilities, about the property value diminution issues that occur surrounding these communities, the safety issues, and the cost to the community. So these are issues that are different than a normal business. And when we're looking at a facility like this, I think it's important to take those factors into account and to really ask the question, why are we here and what are we trying to do? And that's the first point. I think what I hear our attorneys saying to us is that there needs to be a reasonableness in any bylaw that you enact. There needs to be some kind of a connection between a regulation and fulfilling a need as well in this situation. And understanding what that need is frankly something I had advocated about 2 years ago. And I think we may still need to do some more work on that. The definition of what is a homeless person, as we've learned over the last couple of years, depends on who you talk to. Depends on what organization you're talking with, depends on whether it's HUD or whether it's your local homeless advocacy organization. The local homeless advocacy organization has their own agenda, and it's a good one, but it's their agenda, and they survive based on getting money. Their numbers are considerably different than the HUD definition for homelessness. And there was a great article published last April, and I'll give credit to the O'Flynn's in the Spotlight, the Southwest Spotlight. They published a great story that detailed the number of homeless people in Bonita Springs. Since that time, it's been mentioned already, the Lee County homeless counts have declined by 20%. So I think it would be good to get an update and for us to take the step toward the social service organizations and make sure they're included in this process as well. The second point that isn't a part of this ordinance, and I don't see it as a part of the zoning ordinance either, has to do with Margaret Worstley, our Southwest Regional Planner's second recommendation, and it's something she's studied a lot, and that has to do with the density issue. How do you make sure that a particular community or a zip code isn't overburdened with social services, and in particular homeless shelters? How do you make sure that you, on the first hand, come up with a legitimate size that a shelter should be and keep it at that size? And how do you then make sure that if the need arises for another shelter, that you don't overburden that same zip code by enlarging that one? I think that's really important, and I know I'm jumping ahead to the zoning ordinance, but I didn't see that in the zoning ordinance at all. And those are the two factors that allow you to control the potential negative impacts, property diminution, crime issues the most. So those are the two things I just wanted to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Chairman. Dave Gallagher from Cedar Creek, also a member of Be Safe Bonita. I just wish to remind you folks that the language we proposed and put in there did not get there by accident. We don't feel that we created a Cadillac of a homeless shelter. We remember we had working groups in this very meeting. We sat in the corners and we developed ideas. The ideas that carried forward were ones that solved problems from the existing shelters that we know about. We didn't invent that. Likewise, they came from ideas that we learned from other shelters, operations. There's like, New Jersey's got a wonderful code on homeless shelters, Santa Monica, and you name them. So we did not invent these out of whole cloth. We adopted them from existing language. So please don't treat them as a Cadillac and fluff. They're real comments and real concerns. All right, thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? No other public comment? Okay, well, thank you very much. I particularly like the one about buying the properties, but somehow I don't think that, it would be a great thing, but
He's Joe's client.
I don't know where the money would be. Okay. I've lost my...
And at that point, we now have a beautiful conflict between my turn going through. I think we're at a point that, if I may, I'd like to make changes to this ordinance. Now, any things that I change, I will try to be a good record keeper and have that section so that if council wishes to reinstate, they can certainly do so. I think that's probably the best approach so that I can revise this draft and work on this draft. I think there's some valid points. One of the things that we have talked about internally is to have the studies that represent what our needs are presented from the planners. We don't need it here before LPA, but before we go into the adoption process. And so they can look at the Santa Monica, the New Jersey. They have looked at North Carolina. They have looked at other places in the state of Florida. So there are things that we will use anyway. So I hope no citizen thinks that because the lawyers have some issues means that everything is going to poof go away. A lot of it is going to be revisions, but trying to make sure that we're not being that we don't violate people's due process, that we don't violate because it's arbitrary or overbreadth or under-inclusive. So there's some things that I have some homework here, and I'm hoping that I will get that on the operational permit today, that LPA will say, go do your homework, and then it can now go to council for permission to advertise, and then you will see it one more time at an advertisement date.
Does that require a motion?
This is my recommendation to you. Now, I will say that regardless of what you do, I do also report to city council, so I will be asking them for input if you decide not to provide that direction. I mean, if it's something where you want to continue getting input from citizens, we can continue doing that. I'm not sure necessarily, it's not that what they don't say is valuable. It is very valuable, but I'm not sure from a productivity point. And also, I don't know how inclined council is into extending moratoriums, as well as I don't know if extensions of moratoriums are going to always be upheld. I know there's the Lake Tahoe case, but that doesn't guarantee us that we're going to be out of the boat. You need to understand, or I hope people understand, that even if we do extend the moratorium and work on it and work on studies and trying to get a definitive perfect number, which would be nice to have. I mean, it doesn't mean a judge might not say enough is enough, we're ordering you to do something. We will require specific performance. So I would encourage that we continue going forward with the process at this point. It doesn't mean that, again, like I said, I always put my changes in the back so that people can, if council wants to say, well, so-and-so had this. I said, well, yes, and I took it out for these reasons, or, hopefully I'd have Ms. Grady or Mr. Pritt there so they can explain that maybe more eloquently than I, but we can get that information out there. But that would be my recommendation.
Okay, I got a couple of comments. I think, I hate to see a lot of the teeth removed from this ordinance, but I guess there are more rights out there than we ever anticipated when we took on this little project. What is do we need to request an extension on that moratorium? Do we need, is there any validity to that? Is it possible? When does it expire, by the way?
It expires I believe it's May 18th, but understanding that under our charter, I have to back in the 30 days, and then the 2 public hearings. So May 18th would be April. April's a 30-day month, so it's easier to do. April 18th, and then I'd have to have the 2 public hearings before the April 18th date. So it would be April and March that I'd actually have to have public hearings in order to extend it.
So
Okay.
if you brought the changes back at the next meeting?
To
presuming-
you, to council, you mean as
To
far as
us?
make changes?
Or do we need to,
Well, and my preference is to bring it to you one more time as a review. I mean, you've done a great job, but a review for consistency period, which I prefer to do that during the 2 public hearing times. Do you want to see the ordinance one more time
Audrey, as
after
I
I make these
understand it,
changes?
most of these comments from the consultant says that these are statutory requirements, which means that we would need to see the changes and how it impacts what you've written, because you have to address each one of those.
That's correct. I mean, I can do the change, so I can make the changes. Would you like to see it at your February meeting, and then
I would like to see it.
and
yes.
then
Yeah.
we can do
Based on-
advertisements in March?
Based on these comments,
Mm-hmm.
because they are statutory, you're going to have to address these, or a council cannot.
I think
Yeah,
that this is a fragment.
I'm not sure I understand where you're coming from, Mr. Vincent.
Well, if you don't address the comments one way or the other, then they're not getting the full benefit of the information.
Well, yes. I mean, obviously, I need to have,
Yeah,
but
that's what I meant.
This is fragmented, and I think that our duty as this board is to pass on our recommendation to the council in the best form that we can possibly do that. And I don't think we're at that point yet. And I think this needs to be the changes consolidated and then come one more time, so that when we
Okay.
make a motion to pass this on to city council, it is a completed package that this group can put together.
then I'll make the changes per the memorandum that I received in December. And then at your February meeting, you will have a chance to review that ordinance and tell me whether it's good to go.
Okay?
Okay.
okay.
I got one nitpick.
Absolutely, I want those.
The first page on the first whereas,
Uh-huh.
I've read it a few times and I can't do it.
Oh,
So,
ooh, you're right.
has the authority to
Adopt.
what? Oh, okay.
I think,
So it would read authority to adopt codes
Of
or
ordinances.
ordinances? Or codes of ordinance
codes of
codes?
ordinances, and I'd take out the word codes there afterwards for the operation of city business, which means this whereas clause is pretty general, so, and I'm sure I cut and pasted from others, so you may be seeing it in some other ordinance documents. Thank you.
Okay, is it going to read codes of or codes or?
Codes of ordinances.
Codes of ordinance, okay. I tried that several times. It didn't work.
No, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And I appreciate it because sometimes when reading over and making changes and looking at each tree and each branch on the tree, I don't see the total picture or the ones that don't look unhealthy, so I don't necessarily catch those changes, so I appreciate it so much.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I've got 2 points. First of all, I'd like to compliment the work of both Audrey and the Special Counsel, and the other one that's got the flu today. One thing I would agree with that for sure that was made in public comment, Conrad Schultz pointed out there is a somewhat of a conflict in the mission of this group that we said we're going to use and hang our hat on how many homeless we have here. And I can still go back to that public hearing we had where she gave testimony. It was clear that she is a big, big advocate. And if you're an advocate for something, it's like the people in the room are an advocate against, someone that's an advocate for will tend to. So I would urge the city council, the staff, to at least make some good effort to get a better handle on how many homeless we have in Bonita Springs. I think that's critically important. I wish it had been done before. We have good citizens in the audience that did a lot of time and effort to get the data, a lot of the data that we're talking about. And I would also say that in one of the memorandums, one of the esteemed councils wrote, there's a concern if you build it, they will come.
Absolutely.
And that is absolutely 100% accurate. If you build a 180-bed unit, you're going to get 180 homeless in here. So we need to have an accurate count on what this community really has for homeless by that HUD definition. And then that gives legal counsels something to at least argue with if we ever do get the challenge.
Right, and remember, I mean, you just need to have a legitimate number, a rational number.
Yeah.
We're never going to get it down to the exact scientific
I agree.
population with changes.
I agree 100%, but I don't think, and I could be wrong, and Audrey, if I am correct, I don't think the city itself has really made a big, hard effort to get that number. We've kind of got numbers floating around. Some of it's come from our public comment people, and I could be wrong. And if I am, I apologize, but I think this is an area, probably the one of the most important thing that the people are concerned about. It's not only is it 30 or is it 36 or is it 25, but is it based on what size we are now? Are we talking about, oh, we could have this one that's for the plain Jane temporary, and we could have this other one over here. So all this, I think, evolves around what is the need. We don't need to create something for something we don't have the need for. So that's my comment. But I do think that everybody's really worked hard, and I see good things coming out of this. Maybe not as good as I hoped for, though. Thank you.
Fred, I appreciate your efforts in saying, let's identify the need. Let's get a good number. And I think you're never going to get a good number. You might identify 20 or 30 or 40 homeless people in Bonita Springs. How many of them are going to take advantage of a shelter? That's the number you really want. I don't know of any way of finding it out.
Yeah, you don't.
And the other end of this, establishing a number. Suppose you do establish a number and they say, okay, there's 25 homeless in Bonita Springs, and you build a facility and you got 100 applicants. What do you do with those numbers? That's it. That's the epitome of if you build it, they will come.
That's right.
Rex, you have a comment?
I'm back at this housing first and rapid rehousing definition. I would like to have some more information on that because I'm not sure it belongs in here. In fact, I think it does definitely not belong in here because it's a entirely different program than what we're looking at here. But I look at it and say, is that an alternate system help me, is that an alternate system to what we're looking at in the homeless shelter business? I think it's something that I would like to know a little bit more about. If it's something that doesn't fit this ordinance, but does fit into the need that the city may have, is it something that we need to know about, explore?
And I'm sure the planners will provide you after today with information on that, and to all of LPA, and to me too, because it is something I know I know a little, but not completely about this.
Okay.
Could I get one answer here from Mr. Pritt? You address the field of dreams, and if you build it, they will come. And you says that could clash to some extent with individual liberties as embodied in the constitutions as discussed above. What are you inferring to there? Can you explain that a little more?
Well, if the only consideration is we're not going to build it because people in need might come. There are some cases out there, specifically the Pottinger versus Miami case, where people were living under the bridge, on the overpass, and there was an identified need. And what the city did, more or less, is ran them out, arrested them, took their belongings, etc. And the federal court said, no, you can't just do that. What you need to do is, if you've identified this problem, you need to do something about it. So and that has to do with right to travel, freedom of movement, freedom from Fourth Amendment searches and seizures, taking their stuff, whatever little things they had, and removing them from that area. So that's what I was referring to there, those types of individual liberties.
I see. Thank you.
And in addition to Pottinger, I just want to point out there's the other cases in St. Pete that also storage of people's belongings, and a lot of other ordinances that were used as targets, and some of the other case law throughout the state. You need to be very careful, because we hate to forecast because we don't know what the courts will decide. We try to think, what would a judge do with this ordinance? And the big concern that we always have is that this ordinance, if you draft it in a certain manner, you will finally get that straw to break the camel's back, and have it treated as a protected class, or having the homeless in a protected class category. They are not, which means that the standard of review is more of, do we have a rational basis? Is there a relationship to what we're trying to protect in drafting the document? Being still cognizant of the constitutional rights. But once you get to a point that somebody's in a protected class, then you have a higher standard of review, more of a strict scrutiny, and then it's virtually, and we see that with First Amendment issues, certainly First Amendment dealing with content issues, it's virtually impossible, and I think virtually impossible is probably a polite word. It is impossible to draft an ordinance regulating that area. And I know people are seeing that now with corporations or persons, discussions with First Amendments. We see that with some Second Amendment issues currently.
So if we identify the need, then are you saying that it's incumbent that we address that need by federal standards?
Well, you want to make sure everything's constitutional.
Right.
Yeah, you address it in some manner.
Right.
It doesn't always translate into you have to create a homeless shelter within the boundaries of your jurisdiction. As a matter of fact, another idea is to work with your sister jurisdiction, the county, for a county-wide basis or regionally. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have the homeless shelter in your city, but you have to at least address the issues if there are issues that are out there. And again, that's what happened in Miami. the city didn't want people living under the bridge. Well, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You don't
Yes,
want people living underneath that overpass. But they had nowhere else to go, and that was the problem.
But it shows that what we're going to do here in the process is to identify the need first, because then things follow that in order.
It's interesting, that was our recommendation, and I heard several other people
Yes.
who don't necessarily agree with our conclusions also saying that, let's do try to identify the needs. So that seems to me at least be a good starting point. Then we can argue over the numbers, but first let's try to find out what the numbers are.
Is this something that will be presented to the council about addressing that issue of need, how they do that?
As far as, we have asked staff to prepare pretty much a study explaining what jurisdictions they've looked at. How did they come up with the numbers so that the 30 number, or if it's less, a lesser number, how that correlates to the need in this area. So we have asked staff to do so.
Thank you.
If the city's requirement is to just satisfy the need, would buying them a bus ticket to the, another shelter, well.
No,
when you
there's other
think about
communities that have done
the
that.
basic requirement, if you have to do something to satisfy the need, that is one method of satisfying the need. So I'm saying, how deep does the city have to get into this to satisfy that need?
And I think that's a good question, because I think you need to almost research it, because the bus ticket is, and I'll give an example. I'm a native Floridian. So let's pretend I'm actually from here. And if I became homeless, would you give me a bus ticket to my home, which is here? I mean, because people from this area can be homeless. It doesn't mean that everybody, I think we're being too over-inclusive if we think everybody comes from outside into this area. I mean, you do have your snowbird and you have your new transients, but not everybody is a new transient. So the bus ticket, which I believe Broward County or City of Fort Lauderdale did the bus ticket program, does work for some. And I believe even St. Matthew's House does the bus ticket program for some people.
Well, does that satisfy the need that the city has to do something about it?
Well, what would you do then
Is
with-
something as simple as that?
Well, the problem is the bus ticket would work for some of the population, but it would not work for all of the population.
Well, I'm not asking the right question. How elaborate a program would the city have to say that, okay, we have addressed the question and we have a solution here? How aggressive would that have to be?
I think that the question, as I'm understanding, would be better served if this was a more regionalized approach where not just the city, but because the city is just a small population, that Lee County, Collier, Southwest Florida, they looked at it and figured out how do we address it within this population area. I mean, would that be a fair statement, or? I mean, that
I've
was
been
what you
enjoying having
suggested.
you try to answer that question.
Well, Rex, what would happen if we had others busing their homeless here? How would we deal with that?
Well, my question comes to this point. We're saying that by not having any shelter here at all, the city is not addressing the problem. And so my question is, how aggressive does the city have to be in addressing this problem to satisfy the law?
Well, my answer to that would be you better not be too aggressive on the bus ticket issue, because if you said you were not asking the right question, well, to me, the question would be on the bus ticket issue as to whether or not you are telling them that here's your ticket, now go use it. I'm confident that that would be struck down. If you offer that as an alternative to something that is, here's your bus ticket, you can either use it or you can go to jail, I don't think that's going to work. If it is something that's being offered, I presume that St. Matthew's House or any of these agencies say, would you like to go home? Do you have family? Would that be preferable to you than being here? And it was truly an option as opposed to something being forced upon them, then maybe that would work. I don't think that would work as the only thing you do, though.
I have a question then, Bob. You take your individual and you very kindly said to him, would you like to go home? You're doing that very genuinely. But what if he says no?
That's what he said.
If the agency, the city, is required by law to provide some sort of relief for these people who have no housing, and you offer him a bus ticket home and he says no, where does the city stand?
Well, I think that is an option, that was an option that was added, that was given. If it's truly given that way, then that may very well satisfy any requirements that you have. I would not think that a bus ticket program on its own, though, would discharge the entire obligation that you may have. You may have to do something else.
By the same
Does
token,
not necessarily mean that you would have to house them in a temporary, or in a shelter, but there should be some other type of viable option available, in my opinion.
You hit it exactly. What is that option? What is the minimum requirement that the city would have to do to relieve themselves of?
I think he just answered that.
No, he said there are other options. I want to know what that option
And the
is.
city could build its own shelter if the city was inclined and say, well, we don't want private shelters because we want every shelter to be city-operated, so we have control of the operation. Now, that certainly doesn't meet government-light philosophy, but there are public shelters that are out there. I mean, that is, an option. But when you're not going to provide a public shelter, which I don't think council would be inclined to, and I don't think that's your recommendation, to provide a public shelter, then, you can either regulate the shelters that are private, but if you start saying we don't want, the private shelters whatsoever, but we don't have a public shelter, but we don't, but we also will pick you up for trespassing if you're underneath an underpass, or if you're in the woods, and we'll get you for this, for that, and everything else, then you're getting to a point, and that's the Pottinger cases, and that's some other cases out there, that you are criminalizing fundamental behavior, or fundamental conduct, the right to sleep. Sleeping in parks is a great example. We make sure when we put in a park bench to have dividers so people cannot sleep on a park bench.
Well, isn't this bordering closely to civil rights issues?
Exactly.
The arguments for civil rights issues.
It very close, and the concern again, and I can't repeat it enough, is that at this time, there has been arguments in court to make the homeless a protected class. They are not a protected class at this juncture. And do you really want to be the straw to break the camel's back? And that's the threat or the concern that the city has to look at. As explained to me by outside counsel.
I wanted to elaborate a little bit on this numbers business. You talked about the people under the bridge and they removed them. Okay, that was a bad move. But we can count the number of people that are camping out in the woods. I'm sure the police know exactly how many there are and where they are in the business. If we have an obligation to do something for them, do we exercise that obligation by offering them shelter and they turn it down? Have we satisfied our obligation?
I mean, if people don't want social services, it's hard to force them to take
Yeah,
social services.
I hear you. I'm just wrestling with the problem.
And I don't know that the sheriff's department can get an accurate count. I mean, some of those people don't want to be found, and I agree that there are probably, I wouldn't want to, I don't know if I can say the majority, but that don't want help. I mean, that's where they want to be, and as long as the property owner where they happen to be, where they're probably called squatters at that point, as long as nobody's chucking them out of there, then, do we really have a responsibility to handle that? I don't know.
That's a very valid point. The case that we have been talking about has to do with people on public property, underneath the bridge, in a place in which you would not expect to have people living. you would more expect to have them trying to live in a park, for example. Not that they should, but, camp in a park. But in both of those instances, that would be on public property. If they're on private property, well, the police cannot just necessarily go onto all private property for any purpose without probable cause to think a crime's been committed. So it is hard for them, as a practical matter, to go in and do your count for you unless the property owner either complains or agrees to have the police come in and look.
I know when we built our new facility on the north end of Old 41, when we first acquired the property, one of the first things I did was I just tramped through the 10 acres, and sure enough, there was a camp out there. I don't know if I'd call it elaborate, but it was pretty well set up. Somebody'd been there for quite some time. Never saw them. And, once we started to clear it, never heard anything, but there was somebody out there. How long they'd been there, I couldn't tell. Well, they'd been there for some time.
Well, next
was
door
more than
to
a couple
City
of
Hall,
months.
too. I mean,
Right.
that went undetected until the city moved into City Hall.
Yeah. So, that's going to be an ongoing thing. Any more comment, or can we move to our next item?
Please move on.
All right, so moving. This is item 5, the color palette.
Did you want to go, so land use, we'll make some changes after we talk to outside counsel, and then we'll bring both ordinances back to you once we have that.
Right.
Yes, thank you.
If I may make one comment on that,
Sure.
the question came up about distance requirements, and which is covered also in here, 1,000 feet from another, and somebody said 3 miles and so on, and somebody quoted Margaret Worsley on that issue. Distance requirements have been upheld in other contexts, and but it has to be reasonable. It's like anything else. What you have to think about on that is make sure that whatever distance requirements you have don't backfire on you. If your tongues are absolutely hanging out to have a hospital in Bonita Springs, a social services in Bonita Springs, if in particular places, if you have zoning that currently encourages urgent care centers and other types of centers, be careful that you don't accidentally say, well, something like this cannot be in an area where there is similarity, not necessarily identical, and Mr. Dulmer touched on that. But if it's reasonable, it has been found reasonable to have some distance requirements many years ago for gas stations, for example. And I had one in Sanibel. We had dock spacing, and frankly, I thought it was unconstitutional, but the judge said he couldn't find that unconstitutional. He got around it by saying the dock wasn't. The dock that it was too close to was not a dock, even though everybody fished and put their boats next to it, et cetera. But bottom line is you can do something on that. You don't have to put them all in one neighborhood, and you can do some spacing. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you. Am I finished then?
You are?
Okay.
Not,
Yes,
well, not
thank you.
with them, but not with me. So I'll be working with him along with community development staff to bring back revised documents.
Okay, thank you. Okay, on to the color palette.
Thank you. Now, this is a review for consistency with the comprehensive plan. I'm going to read the title block into the record. This is an amendment to the Bonita Springs Land Development Code, Chapter 4 zoning, amending the old US 41 redevelopment overlay district to require a color palette within the old US 41 redevelopment urban core, amending sections 4-1152 through 4-1156, purpose and intent, overview of the redevelopment overlay district, standards for both within and outside the old US 41 redevelopment urban core that comprise the old US 41 redevelopment overlay district, providing for conflicts of law, severability, codification, Scrivener's errors, inclusion in code, and an effective date. The document I have here doesn't have a draft number, so that's a little, I've never seen, I pulled up the LPA packet, so normally my documents have draft information, and I don't know why it did not print out that way. And going through the ordinance, I did talk with City Council after your last meeting. City Council, as far as changes in the ordinance, They took out any provision in the color palette, which is found on page 11 of the ordinance in your packet, as far as existing buildings. They would have it only apply to new buildings. I do have the language in there as far as any other change in color palettes may be approved by City Council on a case-by-case basis. Otherwise, the reviewer is authorized to approve minor shading variations. Council was adamant that they have chosen a color palette, so they did not feel it was necessary for local planning agency to go through and look at the colors, but there is a relief mechanism on the color palette. I also want to point out on page 8 and on page 6 of the ordinance, there is a mobile food vendor to keep the ordinance consistent with the mobile food, and this was stuff that I did on Monday, so it's very new. To keep the ordinance consistent with the proposed plans to go forward with the mobile food vendors, and that ordinance shall be coming back to you hopefully soon. I've just sent out a first draft for comment review to make it very clear that that would be something not permitted in the old 41 area, the urban core area. Now, I do want to point.
It's not going, those mobile food vendors are not going to be permitted in the?
Per council, they would be permitted for, per staff, the direction that I have going forward at this point, and we're not going to talk too much about that, is I have a semi-grandfathering for somebody who's made a substantial investment.
Yeah.
So the person who came here with Mr. Bassinet, because he made a substantial investment, right now, the ordinance reads that he would be allowed to stay there for 4 years. The ordinance also makes it clear if somebody wants to have a temporary use, they can come in, subject to 5 a year, or if we're having, say, a food truck program. For example, in other communities, that's very common, it's very popular right now to have like a food truck, like kind of an expo. So say you have Thursday nights, once a month, where you have all the food trucks coming to the park, that would be something that would be permitted under the ordinance.
But the gentleman that's there now, he's grandfathered in for at least 4 years, is that correct?
At this point, that's what I have in the draft. Now, that's a different ordinance than this, but this is so that I made the changes on pages 7 or 6,
Yeah.
6 and 9 to keep it consistent with the proposal there.
Okay.
So that other ordinance is coming back to us, Audrey, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, right now it's out for staff review.
Right.
It's public record, so anybody has a right to take a look at it, and encourage you guys, if you want to take a look, and if you want to lobby council individually or lobby the city manager, you're welcome to do so. I just follow directions.
I guess my only question would be, at the end of the 4-year period, is he automatically out, or is he allowed to apply for some type of extension? Now, he may not want to be there after 4 years, I don't know, but
Right.
they have made quite an investment there in that place. It really looks nice. So I just, as long as the door doesn't shut on him.
Well, again, that's what I have currently drafted. That's subject to city manager giving me comments, subject to him persuading the city manager perhaps to provide additional time frame. That's between, I know that they were working with one number, city manager with another number. That's a negotiation point between the city manager before, I'll finalize the ordinance.
But, and again, that's coming back before us.
Yes, sir.
So we'll,
Okay.
so if I understand this one, the city council has said that we're not to address the issue of the colors?
City Council, at their workshop, approved the color palette. They recognized when they approved the color palette that there would be need for variations, and that's why they agreed with the LPA on the relief valve. But they did not want to readdress and have, we could go over color palettes 24 hours a day, because what's tasteful to me is going to be different to you or to Mr. Vincent or Mr. Colapietro. We all have, I have pink flamingos in my yard, so we don't know what the taste is going to be for different people.
And that was a lot of the discussion that we had, if I remember right,
Yep.
was the colors.
Yep.
And council made it clear to me, this is a review for consistency with the comprehensive plan, which does address colors in the sense of having coastal type colors, but it does not really go farther than that. So I do believe it's consistent with the comprehensive plan, the selected color palette, which is in the appendix. But it doesn't mean that in the future, council might not take colors out if they find something atrocious, or alternatively add more colors in. And they can do it on a case-by-case basis, or they can amend Exhibit 4, which is on page 24 of the ordinance, to add additional colors. There's 24 sets of colors at this time.
Anyone else?
I have one point on the draft on page 3, item 4B. The statement about the Florida licensed architect or engineer responsible for the design. Isn't that in conflict with Article 3601 of the Land Development Regulations? It says you must be an architect.
Yeah. It's also in conflict with the state board.
That's a good point. Will you see me afterwards and help me make a change?
Yeah, okay. Right.
In other words, we don't want somebody, no different than the lawyers, we don't like people to do unregulated practice of law. I think the architects want to make sure that we only allow architects to practice architecture.
I have a question on page 11. We're talking about if I want to repaint my building, it does not match this color chart that's been adopted. And so, as I understand the position here under 5B, that I would go before the city council on a case-by-case basis to get my color changed.
Well, remember, at this point, you've gone through some of the design review. You know, your building has been reviewed by the reviewer. It's possible that the colors that you wish to use might just be minor variations in shading.
Well, they're substantially different.
Okay, so
I think one of the problems that we had is that we adopted the 24 colors and we didn't actually have the charts in front of us. And so I went and
Council
got
did.
one. And I go up and down Main Street and the fire station doesn't qualify and my place doesn't qualify and the house next door didn't qualify. So I say, okay, everybody's going to have to come to the city council to, when they want to change the color on their building. I think that's kind of an overkill, using a sledgehammer to kill a fly. But why couldn't I just go to John and say, John, I want to paint it this, and this is the...
There's no accounting for taste. I will say that now. I'm hoping that you and the reviewer would be able to work it out. But you do have a relief valve. So if you're adamant on having a particular turquoise that's not in the color palette, and I think there is some turquoise in the color palette, you would have the capability of having that color within it.
Well, there's several buildings on Old 41. The building right next door to me is yellow. And it's a historical building, and I don't know if the yellow is historical or not, but the point of it is, it doesn't match anything that's in here. And it's existing there now. And so I'm saying, well, in that particular case, when that person wants to do something, is he restricted to just this, or can he redo what he has? Which is, I believe, a historical building.
If he chooses a color that is in that approved palette, he simply submits the chip, Mr. Vincent, it's approved, he goes out and he paints. If he chooses to keep the same color and decides he doesn't want anything that's in that palette, he wants something that not only is different than what has been approved, but significantly different. He can come before the city council and he can say to them, you know, I just painted my building a couple years ago, but I know that eventually it's going to need to be painted again. And I want to keep it this color, I want to change it to another color. The city council can approve it or they can deny it. I think the reason why we were looking at having the city council as that final step is, well, one, you don't want my opinion on color. But the city's architect is kind of left out on a limb on his own, especially since most of these meetings, you know, they just happen between an applicant and the architect. It's very difficult in that situation to say yes to one and no to another.
It's actually for the same reason what we talked about in the other ordinance that we were just going through the review. You don't want an unlawful delegation of authority. So when you apply anything architectural, you need to have very clear standards. You need to have an enunciated standard. Otherwise, it needs to go to the top. Otherwise, there's a question as to arbitrary capriciousness in the Loudermill case.
Well, I see the need for it, and I'm totally in favor of it, and it's to control the odd person out. It's not for the main use up and down the street. The thing I think is it has to be something simple.
Right.
Well, Rex, what you're arguing here is the same basis for argument when I want to add on to my building, or I want to change the facade of the building. There are regulations or rules for the design of that, so it's not different in that respect or in that regard.
Okay.
You still have to approach someone to get an approval to do that, and the real reason that the color palettes came up was because of what Audrey mentioned there, was that I had heard the council had a particular opinion about colors. I said, well, let's see what that is. So I wouldn't be out there alone.
John, simple question here. There are some buildings, I believe, maybe not a lot, but they have exteriors. It could be the canopy over the gas pumps. It could be the building itself. It could be whatever. They have almost what you call semi-lifetime finishes. So is there anything in here that says that if you have one of those buildings, that guy has to change the colors, even though it's a lifetime finish color?
City Council decided they did not want either an amortization period or a compliance period. So, no, there is not.
Okay.
They don't have to, if they're not touching it, they don't have to touch it. But if they're going to make changes to it, they need to come into
Right.
conformance.
Okay.
What if they're going to color it, they're going to paint it the exact same color?
Repainting is repainting is repainting.
That's not an issue.
Whoa. I would
Yeah.
I would treat it as renovation, restoration. So yes, I think that if it needs work, it needs to come within the confines of orders. Now, council is providing incentives so that you follow through with the palette.
One of the sources you might look at is the Florida Building Code, existing buildings. In it, it defines 3 categories that a building falls on. It's I'm trying to think, alteration 1, 2, or 3.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Alteration 1 would be, say, colors and so forth, minor repair. So you
right.
might look at that to see.
If you're
see
covering
guidance.
over graffiti, I don't think that the city council will say, you have a skid mark, you're now going to have to change the color over. I think that would be a very horrible enforcement mechanism. I would
think
not
you just
like
look
to
at
be
legal
involved.
nonconforming.
Right.
Okay.
So just to repaint, that isn't a trigger
Yes.
of,
Yes, it is.
It could be. It depends on what the purpose of the repaint is. If you're repainting the entire building, it's probably going to be significant enough that it needs to come within. If you're just touching up something, I think you can continue with your nonconforming status. I think that's what we're saying here.
Just paint it panel by panel.
So
Each week.
So the brightly colored building, 2 doors down from the Hess station, when that comes up to be repainted 5 years from now, if this thing goes through, they'll have to come to get approval, and probably wouldn't get approval
It's
for
going
that
to be
color.
painted now.
What's that?
It's going to be repainted now.
Oh, it is?
They're in violation.
Oh, they are now?
Yes, they've been cited already.
And that's what's happened also, is people have gone and gotten things painted without necessarily coming through the city process.
Okay.
There's 2 processes, incidentally. There's also another one for historic preservation buildings, which is even a higher standard than this standard. This is a minimal standard, and we discovered all that pleasure in getting that interface during the hot caboose.
Yes, so the bottom line is if you want to repaint, and when I say repaint, I mean building is one color now and you want to change that color or to repaint it the same color, but the entire building. You would provide the sample of that to Mr. Vincent, who would either approve it or deny it. If he would approve it, it's consistent or very similar to that palette. He would deny it if it is not similar or identical. If you have your heart set upon this one color, you can present that color to the city council, see if they agree with you. If you were going to be repainting less than 50% of the building, or if you were doing common maintenance, that would not require architectural approval because it's legal nonconforming and would not trigger compliance. Does that kind of walk through the questions that we've
See, panel by panel.
over 5 years?
So I really didn't get off the hot seat.
You have the ability, if you do not feel it is similar to an approved color, that you do not have to make a decision. That was the intent. If you're one shade off,
Yeah.
that's one thing. 3 or 4, that's another.
So do we need a motion on this?
I
or-
do, I want, I do believe it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. As the
So do
planner, I
I.
hope you find that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. If it's not, you better tell me now. I do want to make the one change with Mr. Vincent, not today because I'm supposed to be somewhere right now, but if I could have a motion and a vote on this, I would appreciate it.
Okay. Motion?
Motion to accept it?
We have a motion to accept, second?
Second.
A second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So moved.
Thank you, sir, gentlemen.
Okay. The next thing would be public comment, if anyone has anything else to bring before council.
Thanks.
Council.
I've only been
Board.
waiting 4 hours for this opportunity.
I learned a lot about homes for the homeless. But let me make a comment because I talked to you last month about the property I own next to the big yellow building.
Please state your name for the record,
Oh,
please.
I'm Phil Pugh, own the property across from the fire station where the food cart is now. I just heard about this coming up, a few days ago, so I thought I should show up. I haven't had any discussions about being grandfathered with the 4 years, so that's news to me. It'd be nice if you could promise me in 4 years economics would make me build a new building, which I'd love to do. But it hasn't happened in 8 years since I owned the property. I would like to have more time, and I think economics would just dedicate when I would build the next building. So I don't make a lot of money on that food cart, but it is working, it's attractive, and I'd appreciate longer than 4 years. Just let economics take care of it. Also would like to have the ability to go with the property and not just the vendor I have there now, because you could have an operation, he's gone. But whatever I put back there would be equal or better. You had made a nice comment last month. That's it.
Let me ask you, with this building you're thinking about, what color are you thinking?
I want all granite on the outside. It won't go. But, we're waiting for better water retention problems. That's my biggest concern. Parking, it's slowly being addressed. I have to take a third of the property. I own a third of the block now for water retention. So once we get that, I think I can do something pretty nice. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for coming up.
Deborah McLean, publisher of the Banana Peel. I was interested in what Rex had to say about the bus ticket concept to fill this encroaching mandatory treatment of homeless. The people that live in the woods don't really want to come or leave here because we make it very good for them here. And I'm bringing to light in the news press, Amy Bennett wrote an article about a lady that lives in Estero that uses public transit to come down and eat at the Cafe of Life, and that other people are relocating here because the Cafe of Life. So build it and they will come. It's happening now. And I'm very upset with the city about the Cafe of Life. They didn't have the strength, and that's a polite way of saying what I really want to say no to giving them government property for $1 a month. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? The next item is to approve the date for the next meeting, which is 14th of February.
14th of February is Valentine's Day.
It's my wife's birthday,
Some of
too.
us that are florists are busy that day.
Okay.
I usually change my drawer around at the house.
I got to reorganize my sock drawer too, but, okay.
I will not be here, but you're
Okay,
welcome
well,
to go ahead.
What date is that again?
that's the 14th. Is there
Should be on your minutes.
a problem rescheduling?
Me, no.
I prefer to have as many of us here as we can, so,
Is there a date you have in mind now, or do you want to set one up, have us set something up and work with you individually?
yeah, can we check it out?
You want to keep it the same
and
week?
let us
Yeah,
know?
let's do it after, we want to do it after the 14th, because I'll be
But
busy.
you don't want to move it around too much. Remember, you've got these ordinances coming back to you that's kind of going to go in between.
Yeah, I'll be out of town from the 16th through the 20th.
How about the 13th, Wednesday?
I think
How about the 15th? I'll be busy.
15th is fine.
But you have,
15th would be a Friday, or isn't it? Yeah.
No.
Sam will be out of town from the 16th.
18th is a Friday.
Wait,
I'm
is it-
saying
no.
January, sorry.
15th
What
is
about
Friday.
what about the previous week?
Is everyone okay with the 13th?
No.
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 Okay.
The prior
12th.
week, can that fit?
The 7th or the 21st?
7th of the,
7th might work fine.
7th works?
The 7th would be,
That that work for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Change to the 7th.
and at the same time?
Yep,
Yes,
8:30.
yes. Deb, I'm not sure, but I didn't see any minutes. There are no.
See any minutes.
Well, then we're not approving them. All right, I move, we move. This
Move,
meeting is adjourned at 12:07. Got a windshield.